So today we're talking about freedom. And we've been in the book of Galatians. We've been doing our read, listen, respond through Galatians. The reason that we stopped at Galatians is we've been going through Paul's life is because after his first missionary journey, Paul wrote a letter to his buddies, his friends, believers, where? In Galatia, Galatia, right? And so the reason that he did this was to do a couple things. Anyone remember what those couple things are? To encourage them in the faith, to build disciples, and to teach them. Okay? So he was there on his missionary journey. He came back, and he already got news that they abandoned the gospel of grace that cost Paul so much to preach. Y'all remember when Paul was on this missionary journey that he was getting stalked? I did my little Pharisees, like following behind him, sort of a deal. They're stalking him, they're following him, they're citing riots against him and having people stone him and leaving him for dead. And then he does what? Gets up, brushes off, and walks back into the same town and preaches again. Goes to another one and preaches, goes back into the town and preaches. So it's at a great cost to himself. And this is a guy who used to persecute Christians. And now he's proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ so that there might be more Christians who are following Jesus. So it meant so much to him. So he got wind that in one of the places that he went to visit, and in that area, that they had already been abandoning the gospel of grace, and they'd been jumping back into the law, and jumping back into the heavy burden that comes with trying to be perfect. You don't have to raise your hands, but has anyone ever been under that burden of trying to be perfect? Right, yeah, me too. My brother was perfect, so it was actually easy for him. But being 2 years behind, it was more difficult for me to be perfect. And I never lived up to it, and I never got over it. I still cheat when I play games, because that's the only way I can win. So this is not a shock to Brian, who's raising his hands right now, and Joe, who's accused me of that several times. I have baggage, guys. I have problems. Y'all need to know that. We do the polar bear revolution because I already know how that goes. And y'all don't. And it's tricky. Right? We play liar's dice because I figured out the odds. I've got them going in my head, and I usually win, which is why we play that. Have I ever asked you guys to play a game of chess? No, because I'm terrible at it, and I don't know how to cheat at it. Living perfectly is hard. And if you have the mindset that you have to be perfect, you're enslaved to that unreasonable expectation. And Paul is saying, guys, this law, does anyone know what the purpose of the law was? Raise your hand. Does anyone know what the law is? What's the law that Paul is talking about here?
Don't cheat.
What's that?
Don't cheat.
Okay, the law is don't cheat. That's part of the law. That's good. What else is what was the purpose of the law? How many different laws are there?
200 or
Multiply that times 3. Multiply that times whatever gets you to over 600. There's over 600 laws. And some of them are like nitpicky, sort of like, okay, do this and then do it this way on this day if the sun is out and it's February. And do this in this way. And I've been reading the law lately, not out of enjoyment, but out of school. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what was the purpose of the law? And can anyone tell me what the purpose of the law was? It wasn't to usher them into salvation. It was to keep God's chosen people distinct from the rest of the world. That is the purpose of the law. It wasn't so that salvation could be attained as a result of it. Nothing salvific about obeying the law. It was to keep God's people distinct from the other nations and from people who were hedonistic mindset, just doing whatever they felt was right. That's what's going to be right. The way of the world and diving headfirst into that. Just kind of having it be relative, morally relative, society. Well, this is, like that Super Bowl ad we saw for Scientology that said, where the only thing is true is what's true for you. God saw a problem there, and hopefully you guys see a problem there with that kind of thinking, but the rest of the world didn't. So God said, look, I'm bringing my law to you. I bring this law to you. Obey these commands, follow this thing, do this thing, offering matters to me, so do it this way. Your purity matters to me, so do it this way. You being a distinct group of people in a world that's lost and going the wrong way is important to me, so do it this way. But how do we walk into salvation today? How do we do that today? Someone say through faith. In the Old Testament time before Jesus came, it was the same way. It was through faith as well, right? Abraham had faith and it was counted to him as righteousness, right? So being under this law was a burden, but it was okay because it mattered to God that these things were done in this distinct way that kept him separate from the rest of the world. So it was very, very important to keep the law. And then Jesus came and did what? Didn't abolish it. He fulfilled the law. That everything that they were doing, they'd been doing for a reason, but then came a point. So it's like if I am buying a house, right? And I don't have enough money just to throw down on the table and say, I'm going to buy this house for $200,000. And so I'm gonna make payments on this house, right? So I'm making payments on the house, and then I have interest payments. So and then if I get into a position where I can't make those payments, I at least have to pay the interest. I at least have to pay this much money in order for me not to lose my house and get evicted, right? So I'm paying this much. So that's what they were doing when they were following the law. They were paying this much. They were paying installments on this loan, right? But then Jesus came, fulfilled the law, and they were paid in full. So if I have bought a house for $200,000 and I have paid it in full, I'm not going to continue paying $1,000 a month on that house, am I? It doesn't make sense. The point of me paying $1,000 a month was to keep me right, to keep me distinct, to keep me on this path, to keep me where I needed to go. And then the house was paid off, and that ushered in this brand new gospel. We'll throw it back to Jesus' terms because the house illustration breaks down. But Jesus brought the gospel of grace. It's not by works that you're saved, it's by grace. And don't abandon that. Remember how we started out 2 weeks ago? He started out with, hey, grace and peace to you. Okay. I'm astonished that you've given up the gospel of grace so quickly. I talked to a guy yesterday at LA Fitness who was like, I'm a logic guy, so Jesus isn't really for me. I'll go to church because they have good energy, but I don't buy some of this stuff. I don't buy this whole grace idea. And I'm like, man, and I told Sydney this story. We were kind of in a group of people. She's like, why wouldn't you buy that? That's the best part. And it is the best part. And Paul sees that people are abandoning the gospel of grace. They're leaving the gospel of grace, and they're going back into paying monthly installments on this loan to keep them what? Distinct? They don't need that anymore. To attain salvation, they don't need that anymore. Justification came through grace. Sanctification comes the exact same way, through grace and grace alone. And that was the message that Paul was giving to the Galatians. And we need to hear that today. Not because we're following the over 600 laws of the Israelites, of the Jewish people that was given in the Old Testament, but because we're following different kind of laws, a different kind of legalism. There's a different kind of sanctification that we think happens in this world today. If I straighten up and fly right, then I can do this. And that's the way it is in a lot of things. It's the way it is in school, right? You have to pour yourself into school so that you know what you're talking about, so that you can take the test and that you can get a good grade, so that you can get acceptance and move on to the next grade level, right? Or so that you can even be one of the top people in your class. And that brings in a whole new pride. It brings in a whole new feeling. It brings you to a whole new echelon. Or not, as some of the people are shaking their heads because they're not there. And neither was I, so that's okay. You're in good company. You'll turn out like me one day, so good for you. But the point is that you guys put onto yourselves the law. And some of it isn't even what was mentioned in the Old Testament. It wasn't the laws that God handed down. It's laws that you're making up in your mind that I have to do this thing in order to be valuable. I have to do this thing in order to be sanctified, set apart. I have to do this thing in order to be saved. And you don't have to. Christianity is the only religion in the world. Let me check that. It's the only viable religion in the world where grace covers over everything. Where Jesus' blood, his sacrifice, his atonement, the propitiation that he brought covers over everything. And you don't have to work for it. Now there's other hedonistic things, and evidently Scientology is this way. There's a lot of things that are just like peace, love, hope, rock and roll, drugs, whatever works for you. Yeah, that's fine. Do it. There's other things, I don't know if those are really religions, but there are theistic religions in the world that Christianity is the only one where you don't have to earn it. And for those other religions, I just feel so sorry for them because when is enough? In Galatians, where Paul tells us that if you want to hold yourself to one part of the law, you are under the entire law. And no one can walk through this life perfectly. No one can fulfill the entire law. So you're enslaving yourself to this thing that you will never be able to get through. So what I want to ask you, in the beginning of Galatians 5, if you guys want to follow along, if you want to get out your phones, you can make some notes. I won't think you're texting your friends. But if you are texting your friends, that's okay. Just text them the takeaways that you're getting from me and from the Bible. Okay? Verse 1 in 5 of Galatians. It's for freedom that Christ has set us free. What does that mean? Okay, true or false? Does it mean that Christ has set us free so that we could be slaves again?
False.
False, right. It doesn't mean that. And so what Paul is saying is that, look, Christ died to set you free, and you are enslaving yourself to the law. You're enslaving yourself to legalism. And if that's you, I want you guys to be able to talk about that in your meeting. I brought this up a couple times to my wife yesterday because God has created her with a very sensitive, compassionate heart, and she cares a lot about what people think about her. But I had to remind her in Galatians 1:10, which says, who am I trying to please, man or God? And she really has to be reminded that a lot because she so wants to please me. She wants to please her family. She wants to please her friends. She wants to please strangers. She wants to please everyone. But we just have to call that, we just have to get that in check. Look, if you want to be a people pleaser, you have to know that you're excluding yourself from unreserved service to the Lord. If you're a people pleaser, you're going to be dominated by what the people want, which isn't necessarily in line with what God wants all the time, because people are what? Sinful. They're lost. They're broken. They're deranged. They're making decisions from their heart. Okay, that's fine. Jeremiah tells us that our heart is deceitful above all else and beyond cure. If you're trying to please people, you are excluding yourself from unreserved service to the Lord. And you just have to know that. In the same way, so you put yourself under the slavery of other people's expectations, which you really have no control over anyway. Right? So are you a slave to the law? Probably not. Are you a slave to legalism? That's quite possible. Are you a slave to people pleasing? It's quite possible. Paul says this. He says, stand firm then. Do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. Mark my words, I, Paul, tell you that if you let yourselves be under a legalistic slavery yoke, that Christ is of no value to you at all. Christ died for nothing if you can earn heaven on your own. I won't go more on that one. Again, I declare to you that every man who lets himself be under a legalistic slavery, that he is obligated to obey the whole thing, not just one part of it. You who are trying to be justified by the law have been alienated from Christ. You have fallen away from grace. But by faith we eagerly await through the Spirit the righteousness for which we hope. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision, neither being under legalism, under the yoke of slavery, nor being outside of it has any value. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Okay? So, I've said this before, it doesn't matter what you do on a legalism deal. You can be halfway there, you can be all the way there, you can be entertaining it to a degree. It doesn't matter what you do. None of that stuff is going to earn you heaven, right? But because heaven has been earned for you by what Jesus has done, it's important for you to respond. Your response matters. Your response isn't going to earn you heaven, but your response matters.